There we go. Hey, so welcome to What's Up Over Edmonton for the month of November 2022. My name is Jeff Robertson, and I am a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Edmonton Centre. I've been starting these with a picture of the Queen Elizabeth Planetarium because the original plan was to do this session live in front of a live audience at the QEP. But with COVID, the QEP's opening kept getting delayed. We never moved in. And after seeing all the technical issues that you have to deal with to do a live meeting and stream it out on Zoom with our last regular meeting of our center, I'm thinking maybe I'll just keep doing this on Zoom. It would be a lot easier than hauling in all the equipment that we had to haul in to do our last meeting. I call this What's Up Over Edmonton because the skies here at 53 degrees north latitude are a lot different than what is presented in a lot of the popular astronomy publications such as Astronomy, Sky News, and Sky and Telescope. And I always use this example. This is the sky in Toronto at 11 o'clock on July the 5th. And I always point out this guy here, the constellation Scorpio, which is fully above the horizon in Toronto. However, in Edmonton, this is as much as Scorpio as you're ever going to see. You're never going to see the tail and the stinger. You'll just see its top. It never rises above the horizon here in Edmonton, or for that matter, even in Alberta. Most of the information I use comes out of the Observer's Handbook, which is a publication put out by the RASC every year. In fact, I just got my 2023 handbook last week. It's chock full of information. It's 352 pages long with everything that the amateur astronomer and some professional astronomers could use for observing the nighttime sky. So what have we got? In November, we've got longer nights, but we've also got lousy weather. And today, well, it was not great. So daylight saving time ends this weekend on November the 6th. So the nights will be nighttime will come a lot sooner than it has been. We've got a total lunar eclipse on the morning of November the 8th. You're going to have to stay up all night to see the whole eclipse. It's the last total lunar eclipse we're going to be able to see until 2024. There is no total lunar eclipse visible in Edmonton in 2023. And so hopefully there are no clouds. The last total eclipse we had was in May, where the moon rose already fully eclipsed. And plus it was cloudy that night and you couldn't see anything anyway. So we have the Leonid meteor shower peaking on the morning of the 18th. The radiant rises near midnight. So this is another one where you're going to have to stay up in the wee hours in the morning to see meteors. And again, let's hope the skies are clear. And of course, in the planets, we've got Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars ruling the evening sky. Jupiter, of course, is always brilliant. Mars is getting brighter and brighter. And Saturn is a pleasing target in a telescope. And there's also, the sun's been active, so there's also aurora. Now, just before the meeting, Frank Florian, who's joined us today, was telling me that there's going to be some transits of the moon by the International Space Station. There is a website you can go to. It's called transit-finder.com. And you put in your location, your GPS coordinates, and it will print out a map of the path you need to be within to see the station cross the moon. So that's just something to think about. So as always, I have pre-recorded the planetarium portion. So we'll get started with that. Okay, we'll start the planetarium portion. and look at what we can see in our skies in November in Edmonton. So we'll start with the sunrise and sunset time. So today, November the 2nd, the sun rose at 8:35 a.m. It's set at 5:58 p.m. and astronomical twilight will end, that is, night will officially begin at 7:57 p.m. tonight, and that is Mountain Daylight Time. At the end of the month, on November the 30th, the sun will rise at 8:25 a.m. It will set at 4:19 p.m. and night begins at 6:27 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We've had the time change. So let's look at the planets that are in the evening sky in November. So I've set the time for 9 o'clock, and I've set the date for the middle of the month. So we have lots of planets in the evening sky. We have Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter. We move along, have Uranus, and we have Mars. So as you know, Saturn is one of the 5 naked eye planets. But to really appreciate it, you do need a telescope. Even a small telescope will show Saturn's rings. And a larger telescope will show more detail. Bigger is better, it gathers more light, and you may even see some of its moons. Titan can be seen in a mid-sized telescope, Dion, Enceladus possibly. But like I say, a telescope is really needed to appreciate Saturn. As the sky darkens, Saturn is lower and lower in the sky each day. It was at opposition in August when it was rising as the sun was setting, but because of where it is in its 29-year orbit, Saturn doesn't stay in the sky very long. Further on in a few more years, Saturn will be moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, into Pisces, and it will stay in the sky longer. Another thing you might notice about Saturn through a telescope is that its rings are getting narrower from year to year, and in a couple of years, Saturn's rings will turn edge on to the Earth and will disappear for visual observers. For example, this is Saturn today. This was at the same time last year. This was the rings almost fully open to us in 2019. And in 2025, the rings will be edge on to us. Be very tough to see. And this is just a function of Saturn's axial tilt, which is 26.73 degrees. 3 degrees more than the Earth's tilt. And so as it orbits the sun, its tilt changes in relationship to its appearance to us, and which is why the rings open and close as Saturn orbits the sun. Moving eastward about 33 degrees, we come to Neptune, the 8th planet in the solar system. It can be seen in binoculars, but a telescope will show it as a pale blue disk. And a mid to large size telescope will also show you its large moon Triton. And on this day, there it is there. It was once thought that Pluto would be very similar to Triton, because Triton appears to be a captured object from the Kuiper belt, because its orbit is actually goes the wrong way. It's a reverse orbit around Neptune, and eventually, it'll be millions of years from now, the gravitational forces and tidal interactions between the planet and the moon will cause Triton to crash into Neptune. But that, like I say, that's not for a few million years from now, so don't stay up late to watch that. 6 degrees from Neptune, going east, is Jupiter, the largest planet in the solar system, and with a good pair of binoculars, you can spot not only Jupiter, but four of the Galilean moons. And at this time, 9 o'clock on the 15th, You have Ganymede and Europa on one side. Io is just about to cross in front of Jupiter, and then Callisto is way off to the west of the planet. As I mentioned many times, the moons do change position from night to night, and Io, which is the closest moon to Jupiter, actually changes its position. You can watch it move hour to hour. So here's the 15th, the 16th, the 17th. All the moons are on one side now. 18th. We can only see two, so or three, I should say. One must be behind the planet. And on the 19th, we've got Io, Ganymede on one side, Callisto and Europa on the other. So it's fun to watch the moons dance around Jupiter. And on the night of the 15th, at 9 o'clock, you can watch the great red spot spin into view. You may be able to see Io crossing in front of the planet, if the seeing is good, and if the seeing is, even if the seeing isn't so good, you'll be able to see its shadow crossing across the face of the planet. And moving eastward from Jupiter, we come to Uranus. Uranus is about 47 degrees, or about 5 clenched fists held at arm's length from Jupiter. Uranus can be spotted with binoculars, even in the city, but a telescope will resolve it as a pale blue disk, almost, I don't know, aquamarine, turquoise. It's not as blue as Neptune. Neptune is the bluer of the two of these, they call them ice giants, out on the edge of the solar system. Which brings us to Mars, about 40 degrees from Uranus. So Mars is getting brighter and brighter every month, and it will reach opposition early in December. It is easy to spot. It is, by 9 o'clock, it is well up in the sky, and it glows with kind of an orangey, steady glow. It is in the constellation Taurus. The red giant Aldebaran is nearby. You can compare the colors between the two, but Mars is definitely the brightest object in that part of the sky right now, and it will continue to get brighter into December. It's actually closest to Earth on the 30th of this month, but it reaches opposition on December the 8th, when it will rise as the sun sets. It's a great time to view Mars through a telescope, a mid-sized telescope. You should be able to see some surface features on the planet, and hopefully no big dust storms blow up on the planet and turn it into just a blank orange blob like it did with its last opposition 26 months ago. I'm looking forward to observing Mars and seeing those surface features, seeing those polar caps. It is the one planet where you can actually see stuff on the surface. And last month I talked about retrograde motion, which Mars is now in. As the Earth catches up to Mars, its appearance against the background sky seems to have it going backwards and then stopping and then coming forward again. For example, this is what Mars looks like tonight. And on the 30th, it will be well between the horns of the bull of Taurus. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about the horns, well, this is the depiction of Taurus the bull. So that big V is its horns. I'm not going to talk about the morning planets because there are none. Venus has passed Superior Conjunction, where it swings behind the sun and is now in the evening sky. And Mercury has done the same thing. However, they are still too close to the sun to be seen in the evening sky. Here they are on the last day of the month, literally minutes after sunset. So there would be just too much sky glow to see Venus or Mercury. They'd be too low on the horizon to see. We have a lunar eclipse this month. If you want to watch it, you have to stay up all night on the morning of the 8th. The eclipse begins at 1:02 a.m. When the moon enters the penumbral shadow of the Earth. And we'll just run this simulation here. The moon enters the umbral portion of the Earth's shadow at 2:09. And totality begins at 3:16 when the moon is fully within the Earth's shadow. The maximum eclipse occurs at 3:59, and totality ends at 4:41. And you can see the moon starting to come out of the shadow. The umbral part of the eclipse ends at 5:49, and the moon passes out of the penumbral shadow at 6:56. On the morning of the 18th, which is a Friday, we have the peak of the Leonid meteor shower. And there's the radiant of the shower right there. The comet that causes this meteor shower is 58P Tempel-Tuttle, which has an orbital period of 33 years. Typically, we start to see Leonids around the 14th through its peak, and then it ends around November the 21st. The meteors are traveling at fairly high speed when they hit the atmosphere. They're one of the faster meteor showers. They're hitting the Earth's atmosphere at about 71 kilometers a second. They can produce some very bright streaks and even leave some trails. You may read that the peak of the Leonids is on the 17th, and that is when the Earth is passing through the densest part of the debris field, which causes the shower, but it's daylight here. So we're saying for Edmonton, the peak is the morning of the 18th. Like most meteor showers, the radiant for the shower does not rise until after midnight, and it is the case with the Leonids. So I'm just going to run this here at 500 times speed. And so you see the radiant rising up. Just shift over a little bit here. You'll see 10 to 15 meteors an hour. However, there's some hope here. Now, I was reading an article in the November Astronomy magazine, and a couple meteor scientists, Mikhail Maslov from Russia and Mikaya Sato from Japan, who have in the past made some pretty accurate predictions about bursts of meteors. And they are saying that at midnight on the morning of the 18th, so this period we're talking about right now, there may be a burst of meteor activities, maybe even a couple hundred an hour, who knows. And they're also saying that on the evening of the 18th at 11 o'clock our time, there may also be a burst of meteor activity. And this is as the Earth passes through clumps of debris left by previous passages of the comet. So that's something to look forward to. On the downside, since 2000, 74% of the time, the skies have been cloudy on the night of the Leonid peak. As you can see in this illustration, there is a moon in the sky. It's a 19-day-old moon. It rises after 1 a.m. and it will cut down some of the fainter meteors. But if it's clear out, get out of town, take a chair, dress warm, take a hot beverage, and find a nice spot and enjoy the Leonids. As we get deep into the fall season, some of our old friends we were observing earlier in the fall and late in the summer are moving off of center stage. The summer triangle, which was only a couple months ago directly overhead, is now heading into the west-northwest sky. But it's still high enough to view some of its notable objects, like the Ring Nebula and the Dumbbell Nebula. Little ways over from the triangle is the keystone that makes up the body of Hercules. and the great globular cluster M13, which can be seen with binoculars as a smudge or a fuzzy star, or with a telescope as this lovely globular cluster, even in the city. And getting almost directly overhead is the great galaxy M31 in the constellation Andromeda, and it isn't that far from the great square of Pegasus. And there we see the Pegasus astronomical drawing. And right next door to Pegasus and Andromeda is constellation Perseus with its fine double cluster. Again, a fine object. It looks like a smudge in binoculars, but in a telescope you can resolve these two fine open clusters spaced right next to one another. Over in the east we can see the king of the winter constellations, Orion, is just coming up at 9 o'clock on the 15th. Here, let's just change the time here, make it 11 o'clock. There we go. And he's well up in the sky as he will march across the sky throughout the winter. It is my favorite constellation because there's just so much to see, including one of my favorite objects, Orion Nebula, or M41. I'm having a little trouble there. There we go. And it is the nearest star-forming region to the Earth. And I'm sure I'm looking forward to seeing pictures from the Webb telescope, which sees in infrared light, so it'll be able to see through all the dust that makes up the nebula to see these newborn stars. Off to the left, off Betelgeuse, which is this star right here, the shoulder of the giant, or Orion's shoulder, we can come to the Christmas tree cluster. I've put a few labels up here. And there it is, and it is a open cluster of stars with some nebulosity in it that looks like a Christmas tree. And in the constellation Gemini, there is a planetary nebula known as the Eskimo Nebula, but it's also called the Clown Nebula. And it is a planetary nebula, the remains of a sun-like star at the end of its life. So that's about all I'm going to say right now. The winter sky is the most interesting sky from Edmonton, by far. There's lots of stuff to see. The nights are long, admittedly. Sometimes they're very cold. And November, traditionally, has the worst weather, astronomically speaking. So with that, I will end the planetarium section and ask if there are any questions. Okay. Are there any questions? I see some chats here. I should see what's going on here. Oh, I see Frank answered it about the Transit Finder website. Okay, great. Thanks, Frank. I noticed Alistair popped in. Alistair, you have anything to add?
No, you covered it real well. There's yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. I've seen some remarkable Novembers, but that's what they are, remarkable, because they're very uncommon if it's good. But hey, you only need 3 hours or 1 hour of clear at the right time. So there's always miracle holes and. But as I mentioned to Luca and Bruce in an email earlier today, I'm not even going to bother looking at the weather until like literally the day before the event, because it's so changeable. Stuff comes ripping in off the Pacific that's halfway to Japan just 2 days earlier. So it's not a good thing to try forecasting weather with any accuracy in November. And
Yeah.
but I've seen even again, 3 hours ahead. It's like, it's kind of Chinook variable cloudiness. So sometimes you just gotta take it as it is and set your alarm, poke your head out. But it might be clear for hours. We do get lucky. So.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Okay, now for those of you who've been with us before, you know that I do a section on the moon and then I do a section on a constellation. Well, I was going to drop that because the people who were doing the introduction to sky gazing were stepping away. Or Alistair, who did the introduction to sky gazing, was stepping away, and Berta was going to take up the torch, and we were going to combine our sessions and do them together on the same day. And this was where we were going to do the intro to stargazing, but unfortunately, real life gets in the way, and Berta is unable to do that. So I did throw together something on the moon, but I didn't do anything on a constellation this time. But it looks like introduction to sky gazing has come to an end. Now, most of the sessions are on our YouTube channel if you want to check them out, because it is a cyclic thing that happens over the course of a year, and I think a whole year is in the YouTube sessions if you want to check those out. So we'll go on to the moon.
What do you see when you look at the moon? When it's full and round, do you see a balloon? Does it look like a cookie with the bite taken out? What do you see when you look at the moon? It follows a path every month of the year. After 7 days, the first quarter appears. A week later,
And speaking of the first quarter, it occurred yesterday on November the 1st. The moon is full on November the 8th, the night of the eclipse. And in November, it is known as the beaver moon. It's also known as the frost moon, the freezing moon, the mourning moon. I presume it's mourning the loss of good weather. And also the darkest depth moon. Third quarter is on November the 16th. The moon is new on the 23rd. And first quarter comes around again on November the 30th. Now, sometimes two full moons in a month are referred to as a blue moon. I don't know what two first quarters in a month would be. Plaid moon, who knows? Now, normally I would take a feature from the Explore the Moon certificate, either the binocular or the telescope certificate program from the RASC. But as I said before, I was planning on dropping this whole thing. However, when I was informed that intro to stargazing was not going to happen, I threw together something I did on a previous presentation, though not on WhatsApp, something we did back in May on the eclipse. So because we have an eclipse, we're going to talk about the eclipse. So does a lunar eclipse affect werewolves? I don't know. So a lunar eclipse occurs when the sun, the moon, and the earth are in a line, and the moon moves into the earth's shadow. There are two parts of the shadow. There's the penumbral shadow, which is the Earth's outer shadow, this part right here. And when the moon moves into the umbral or the penumbral shadow, it starts to fade a little bit, takes on kind of a dusky appearance, and it's hardly noticeable, to be perfectly honest. Now, if you're standing on the moon, looking back at the Earth during the penumbral phase, and you had proper eclipse glasses or a number 14 welding glass, you would see a partial eclipse of the sun, with the Earth taking a bigger and bigger bite out of the sun. Once it enters the umbral phase, when the eclipse is considered total, that is when the moon takes on an orangey, reddy color, depending on how much contaminants are in the Earth's atmosphere. That orange color is a result of sunlight refracting through the Earth's atmosphere and scattering the light toward the red end of the spectrum. If you're standing on the moon and looking back, it would look like a ring of sunrises around the Earth, or sunsets, whatever floats your boat. So here's a little animation here. So there it is, entering the penumbral phase. Moon enters the deepest part of the Earth's shadow, and you get this orange color. And then it moves out of the umbra. And if you were standing on the moon, as I was saying earlier, this is what you'd see. You'd see the Earth forming a sunrise all the way around the Earth. Now, you may ask, why isn't there an eclipse visible every month? And it has to do with the tilt of the moon's orbit around the Earth. It's tilted at 5 degrees to the ecliptic. The ecliptic plane is the plane of the solar system. You can call it the center line of the solar system. The moon does not orbit along the ecliptic plane. It orbits 5 degrees tilted to that. So, as the moon orbits the Earth, it does pass through 2 nodes on either side of its orbit. One is called the descending node. That is where the moon is above the plane and then crosses the descending node and then is below the plane. And then when it gets to the other side of its orbit, it enters what's known as the ascending node, where it is below the plane of the solar system, or the ecliptical plane, and goes above it. If the moon happens to be full when it passes through one of these nodes, you will see a total eclipse. If it is not passing through one of the nodes, you're not going to see anything. So here's a little drawing here. On these far ends here, you can see the moon is at the proper location. It passes through the node, and you see a lunar eclipse. And also, because eclipses come in pairs, there's always a solar eclipse 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after a lunar eclipse. And we had a partial lunar eclipse or partial solar eclipse on the 25th of October, but it wasn't visible here. Just of note, there's going to be a partial solar eclipse on October the 14th, 2023. Now, because the orbital plane moves, the moon, let's start again. Because the orbital plane of the moon precesses it, moves in space, these nodes are constantly changing, and they make one revolution every 18.6 years. That's why we're not going to have another total lunar eclipse or even a partial lunar eclipse next November, because the node has moved. So that's why we do not get an eclipse every month. It's all to do with, my cat is jumping up on me here. Come on, Louis, go down, get down. Jeez. Sorry about that. That's why we don't have lunar and solar eclipses every month. Now, I said this in the planetarium section, but here's a table. Again, for this eclipse that's coming up on the morning of the 8th. So the penumbral begins at 1:02. The moon enters the dark part of the Earth's shadow at 2:09. It'll be fully in the shadow and totality begins at 3:16. It's at maximum eclipse at 3:59. And it starts to move out of the shadow at 4:41. So it's a fairly long eclipse. The umbral part ends at 5:49. The penumbral ends at 6:56. And then we can all go and have a coffee or go to bed. Okay, this is our space history section. And this is where we look at a past event that not only occurred in this month, but whose anniversary year is divisible by 5. So in 2022, we're looking at events that in years ending in a 2 or a 7. And we're going to do something a little different this time. Although we do have a real event, we're going to look at some alternate history. And I will start with a short clip here.
Wait, here we go. I see something. There he is. We have him.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Can you believe it?
After thousands of years, ladies and gentlemen, gazing up in the heavens and dreaming of this day,
A man is about to set foot on the moon.
Я делаю этот шаг во имя моей страны, во имя моего народа и во имя марксистско-ленинского образа жизни. Я осознаю.
Don't know what he's saying, obviously, but we'll get a translation of his words. Man's first words from the moon. In just a minute.
Okay. We have the translation now, and these are the words that cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, the first man to set foot on the moon, spoke just moments ago.
I take this step for my country, for my people, and for the Marxist-Leninist way of life, knowing that today is but one small step on a journey that someday will take us all to the stars.
Okay, that is from a television show called For All Mankind. And it's on Apple TV. I've never actually seen a whole episode. I've just seen clips on YouTube. But from what I've seen, I can see the production values are really, really good. Hopefully, Apple will release it on a format that I do have, and I can watch it because I understand it's quite good. So why am I talking about a fictitious alternate history? Well, I'll get to that here. Now, if the Russians had indeed flown to the moon, they did have a flight plan that was somewhat similar to the Apollo flight plan, with some significant differences. Now, first off, the equivalent to the Apollo Command Service Module was this, and this is the LOK, or roughly Lunar Orbital Craft. It was a heavily modified Soyuz with extra propellant and consumables and docking equipment. I call it a Soyuz on steroids. There's a cutaway version of it. It was 10 meters long versus 7.2 meters for a standard Soyuz. It was designed to carry only 2 cosmonauts. One would stay on board while the other would transfer to this thing. And this is the LK lander, or translated roughly Lunar Craft. It was a one-man craft. It had very limited consumables and was only designed to stay a few hours on the moon. The cosmonaut would exit the craft through a side hatch and climb down to the surface on a short ladder. You can kind of see the ladder there. Now, like the Apollo lunar module, it had a separate descent stage and an ascent stage that separated to return to the orbiting mothership. However, unlike the lunar module, whose ascent stage had its own engine. The LK used the same engine for landing and return to orbit. The descent stage stayed behind on the moon, and it contained the fuel used for landing. It was quite a bit smaller than the Apollo lunar module. It was only 5.8 meters tall versus 7 for the LEM. And you might notice up here, this is the reaction control system. It was mounted on the very top of the cabin, where the RCS on the LEM was mounted on 4 quads spaced around the ascent stage. The most, and this is an actual LK lander. Now, had it flown, it would have been covered in insulation blankets, most likely green. They used green insulation blankets on the Soyuz back in those days. Most significant difference in the flight plan was how the Soviet moonship would arrive in orbit and how the LK would land. They would arrive in lunar orbit like this. This is the configuration it would arrive in lunar orbit. This engine here, which is the 5th stage of the booster, would be used to break the whole craft into orbit. This shroud would have been jettisoned long before it arrived. Now, the LOK and the LK lander did not have docking hatches on the top. They had a docking mechanism, but they didn't have a hatch. There was no way to transfer from one vehicle to the other within the vehicle with like a tunnel, like in the Apollo. So the astronaut who would fly down to the moon would actually exit the LOK and do a spacewalk to the lunar lander and then get inside, seal the hatch, and then separate from the mother ship. And so this whole part here, including the lander and this stage they used to break into orbit, would start on its way to the moon. This descent stage, or this 5th stage, would have sufficient fuel to do most of the braking as the lander approached the moon. It would jettison only about 1 kilometer above the moon, and then the LK's lander engine would fire up, and the cosmonaut looking out his window would only have less than a minute to pick out a landing spot and make for it, because it did not carry a lot of fuel. Once landed, he would spend a minimum of 2 hours on the moon. That's the time it takes for the mothercraft to make one orbit around the moon. But it would most likely spend maybe even 8 hours on the moon before returning. He would have done a brief EVA, collected some samples, planted a flag, and then he would fire the engine again, separate from the descent stage, and then return to orbit. Once he got into orbit, it would dock to the front of the ship here. But as I say, there's no transfer tunnel, so he would have to do another EVA from the remains of the lander into the mothership, carrying his samples. And then the lander would be jettisoned, and the mothership would fire its engines and return to Earth, similar to what the Apollo did. As a size comparison, here is the Apollo craft with the LEM attached, and you can see the Russian craft above it. And I'm getting to the historical part. So I did find a movie actually made in Kerbal Space Program, a way better version than the one I use, because the crafts actually look like what they're supposed to be. So here's a little movie I took off YouTube and then edited it down, and just to show how this whole operation would work. So there it is, arriving into lunar orbit. Okay, so that's how the program would work once, if it had ever happened. Now, the LOK and the LK lander were both successfully tested in Earth orbit, and they were capable machines. So the question is, why didn't they go? And the answer is because of this. This is a CIA spy satellite picture of the Russian moon rocket sitting on the launch pad, and it was known as the N1 booster, and it would carry cosmonauts to the moon. The whole Russian lunar program was not officially acknowledged until after the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the time, the official line from Moscow was that they never really intended to go to the moon. They were concentrating on space stations. So the N1 booster had its problems. And here it is here. It was a mammoth thing. It had 30 engines in its first stage. And it was a 5-stage rocket. And here is a cutaway of the N1. And here is an N1 on the launch pad. And just for scale, because it's sometimes called the Russian Saturn V. So let's see how they compare side by side. So I mentioned before that I do like to build models, since these are a couple of my models, one of a Saturn V and one of an N1 booster in 1/144 scale side by side. And you can see that they were of similar height. The N1 was 105.3 meters high. The Saturn V was 110.6. It had this flared end at the bottom, as you can see here. So it was wider. It was 17 meters across at the bottom at its widest point, where the Saturn V was 10 meters. The N1 had 5 stages, while the Saturn V had only 3. The N1 had 44 engines in it, 30 of them in the first stage alone. The Saturn V had 11 engines, 5 in the first stage, 5 in the second stage, and 1 in the third. Its launch weight was 2.7 million kilograms, where the Saturn V was heavier, 2.8 million kilograms. The first stage thrust of the N1 was actually greater than the Saturn V, 10.2 million pounds of thrust versus 7.6 million pounds for the Saturn V. But the translunar injection weight for the N1 was 23.5 thousand kilograms, where the Saturn V had a TLI weight, which is how much weight it could send to the moon, of 43.5 thousand kilograms. The major difference in this was because the N1 used RP1, which is kind of kerosene and LOX for all the stages, where the Saturn V used RP1 and LOX for only its first stage. The second and third stages used liquid hydrogen and LOX, liquid oxygen is what LOX is. Dang cat. Which delivered a lot more energy, and thus it could lift more payload for the same volume of fuel. Also, the Saturn V carried more fuel because its cylindrical stages were basically just big fuel tanks, while the N1 used spherical tanks inside an outer skin. And just so you get an idea, there's a little guy I put on the next to my Saturn V. So you can see both these machines were extremely large. Now, there's many reasons the Soviets never landed a man on the moon, besides the N1. They started late. They started in 1965, and they didn't fund the program properly. And they also split funding with competing programs from different design bureaus. One of the most notable one was the Zon program, which was a plan to fly 2 cosmonauts around the moon in a modified Soyuz it wouldn't orbit the moon. It would just slingshot around and come back to Earth. And then the Russians could say, hey, we beat the Americans to the moon. Of course, neither of them worked. And their moon rocket didn't work because of lack of testing. For one thing, because Kennedy Space Center is on the ocean, fully completed first and second stages could be shipped from their factories by barge to the launch site. The third stage was shipped by air in a plane called the Super Guppy. The Americans built giant test stands where they built these stages, and they would do run tests on completed stages, firing all the engines before shipping them to the Cape. The N1 stages were shipped in pieces and assembled on site. And the first stage was never run tested. Its 30 engines were tested individually, but they were never put in a cluster and fired all at once. And it turned out that in-flight vibrations from all these engines firing together caused all sorts of failures. Engines would conk out, fuel lines would rupture because of the vibration. On the first of 4 flights on February 21st, 1969, fuel lines cracked due to vibrations, and a fire started in the base of the rocket. It burnt through wiring, knocking out many of the systems, including the guidance system, and its engine shut down, and the N1 crashed about 52 kilometers from the pad. Its second flight on July 3rd, 1969, and there's an interesting story about that because there is a picture that shows 2 N1s on the pad. And what the idea was is that they would test the N1, and if it was successful, this was July 3rd, this was just a few weeks before Apollo 11 left for the moon. If it was successful, the July 3rd launch, and if Apollo 11 failed, the second N1 already sitting on the pad would be sent to the moon with the hope of beating the Americans to the first lunar landing. On that flight, this is the one that I found the most photographic documentation about. The rocket rose about 100 meters when a motor exploded and caused the control system to shut down most of the other engines. And so the rocket fell back on the pad and exploded with the force of a small nuclear bomb. The launch pad was completely destroyed, and it dug a 10-meter deep crater. The third flight on June 26, 71, the rocket's guidance system failed, and the rocket started to roll and oscillate, and it broke apart and crashed about 15 kilometers from the launch site. So you're probably wondering, where am I going with on this? So on November 23rd, 1972, 50 years ago this month, the fourth and final N1 rocket took off. The rocket flew well up until about T plus 90 seconds. It was about 15 seconds from first stage cutoff when 6 inboard engines shut down as they were supposed to. This was to lessen the stress in the vehicle prior to staging. However, when those 6 engines shut down, it caused basically a giant hydraulic shock, or think of it like a big water hammer. And water hammer can be very serious. Hydraulic shock is very serious. I sold valves for 40 years, and I've seen what an excessive water hammer can do to a piping system, and boy, it ain't pretty. Anyway, this hydraulic shock ruptured fuel and oxidizer lines in the first stage and started fires at the base of the rocket. And then a motor exploded, and the rocket started to break up at 110 seconds after launch. Now, in all 4 cases, the launch escape systems did function properly, pulling the unmanned capsules away from the booster. And although the Soviet lunar program was not formally canceled until 1974, this last failure was the end of the line for the Soviet Union's hopes of landing a man on the moon. Parts of other N1s under construction were repurposed as tanks and even as storage sheds, or they were just scrapped. The engines, which caused a lot of trouble at the time, evolved into a fairly successful engine that's still used today. So 50 years ago this month, the USSR lost its hopes of ever landing a man on the moon. And with that, I put together a little video tribute to the N1, describing the events or showing the events I just described. I always reference heavensabove.com. It's a great site. It's astronomical. What the hell?
It's a cloudy sky.
Yeah, I just said Zoom quit unexpectedly. Can you guys still see something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we can hear you. We
Okay.
can see
Yeah,
the link
you're
to
fine.
Heavens Above, but
It's just your
Okay.
video
for
or-
Just my computer. Okay. Yeah. Heavens Above, great site. You can print star maps, put in your coordinates or your address. You can access it.
I think you just froze up now.
oh,
Jeff, we still see you, but you're muted right now.
Yeah, I'm just getting these messages popping up here. And my PowerPoint quit. Okay. The next session will be of What's Up will be November 30th at 7:30. The next meeting of the RESC is on November the 14th. at 7:30. It's also on Zoom. It's also going to be live at the in the Ziegler Star Theater in the TELUS World of Science. Anyone's welcome to attend. Now, we're going to be doing our how to buy a telescope session sometime in November. It should be on a Wednesday night. I was just talking to Luca about that today. It'll probably be the third or fourth Wednesday in November. But just watch our website, and I'm sure there'll be something posted on Facebook also. And with that, I will say that's all. Are there any questions? I see a chat here. I don't turn my mic on. Happy birthday to you. Oh, thanks, Jane. Sorry. Yes. Okay. I should have read that out loud. Yeah. So
Jeff,
are there?
yeah, just one more thing. There is going to be a launch of the Artemis, at least the attempted launch again on November 13th in the evening around 10:07 our time.
Oh, okay.
Since
I
you've been
saw.
talking-
13.
13th, yeah.
Yeah, I saw a thing today that they were going to announce the date. They were going to possibly roll it back in 2 days back to the pad. But at the report I saw, they didn't have a launch date yet. So the 13th. Oh, okay, great. I hope it goes. I hope
Well,
it goes.
we'll see. Third time's the charm, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, as Bill Nelson said, we were scrubbed 4 times.
One of the interesting, associated facts about the climbing of Mount Everest was that when the Brits were about, halfway to base camp, not even at base camp, they were waiting to hear whether or not France or Italy had successfully climbed Everest the season before. And so it was the plan was if they had made it, they would have scrubbed the British expedition, because it's like, well, no point being second.
Okay.
So that was an interesting thing. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I know in For All Mankind, the Americans did land on the moon. So, yeah, sort of like Scott and Amundsen going to the South Pole. Although I did prefer Scott of the Sierra on Monty Python. I thought that was a much better story. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Well, let's hope the weather is good for the eclipse and for the Leonids. Cross our fingers, right? And Frank Florian, who's with us tonight, has told me that they will be opening the RASC Observatory, which is just south of the TELUS World of Science, on the morning of the 8th. If you want to come down and view the lunar eclipse through a telescope, and he's also going to try and live stream it on Facebook with a camera attached to a telescope. So
yeah, I'm using Facebook Live, the Tuesday account, the Science Center's account. So we'll see what the weather does. As Alistair said, let's just wait till the day before and see where we go. Right now, the forecast is cloudy and snow, but who knows?
Yeah, it's only 6 days away. So let's hope so.
It's when I look back to some of the wintertime lunar eclipses we've had some remarkable luck where we got 30 minutes out of the thing, or remember one of the ones when it was that minus 32 or whatever, and it was like that one was really iffy, and it's just like, well, and oh, there it is.
Yeah. Well, I remember the one on the winter solstice, and that was not a warm day either. I
No.
froze my patootie off that day.
I think our computers froze on that one. I remember the one we were outside right by the Science Center doors, and we
Oh,
both had
yeah.
computer-controlled telescopes, and our screens wouldn't do anything. We couldn't get the telescopes to track properly.
Yeah, our handsets froze. No, I was thinking of the one where we were at the deck, and it was on the 21st of December,
Mhm.
and there was a big deal in the media. I know, I think Global or CTV was there, and it was a beautiful night, but man, was it ever cold. And there was a lot of people that night too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I went out to Blackfoot that night. I was the only one there. It was very quiet.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Yeah,
But
but
the-
I remember, yeah. I remember that with Frank out in front of this science center with, yeah, and yeah, man, was that cold.
We didn't have many guests either.
No, we just had that one lady show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that really hit me with that particular one was when you're out at a dark site, of course, the sky, and especially in winter, full moon, snow on the ground, it's bright out there. And then it's just as the eclipse starts, you sort of notice getting darker. And then you just see the sky just starts to go dark. The stars come out, then the Milky Way is there.
Mhm.
It's pretty special to see that. And that's my plan A, and we'll see. But as you all know, I bail just as much as anybody else does.
Yeah, for sure. I'll have to get some more foot warmers and get out my Sorels for the 8th if it's clear out. So, yeah. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I will say thank you very much for joining us here for What's Up. I really appreciate people showing up every month, the regulars and the new people too. And look forward to seeing you again on the 30th for What's Up over Edmonton for December 2022. So thank you very much, and good night.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Jeff. Happy birthday and have a great night.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you.